His music, his generosity will outlive not only us, but our children and their children.
8 months after her husband's funeral, Tricia Covel said almost nothing in public. No sit-down interviews, no lengthy statements, no social media essays. While her children spoke at tribute after tribute, she stayed close to home in Oklahoma, largely out of view. Then, on October 20, 2024, in the CMA Theater in downtown Nashville, in front of hundreds of the biggest names in country music, she walked to a podium holding a single sheet of paper, and for 16 minutes, she finally broke that silence. What she said that night reframed how the world understood both her husband's final years and her own quiet strength. To understand why that moment carried so much weight, you have to go back to the fall of 2021, when Toby Keith Covel, known to the world simply as Toby Keith, first learned he had stomach cancer. He kept the diagnosis private for nearly 6 months, quietly undergoing chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery while continuing to run his business ventures and stay connected to his family in Oklahoma. It wasn't until June 12, 2022, that he told the public at all, posting a statement that read in part, that he had been diagnosed the previous fall and had spent 6 months in treatment. He wrote that things were, in his words, so far so good, and that he needed time to rest with his family before returning to the stage. The news stunned a genre built partly around his image of tireless resilience. The man behind Should Have Been a Cowboy, I Love This Bar, and Beer for My Horses was, for the first time in his career, asking fans for patience rather than promising another tour. What followed was not a straight line toward recovery, but a long, uneven fight that Keith chose to conduct mostly in public fragments, interviews, red carpet appearances, and the occasional stage return. In December 2022, speaking with CMT's Hot 20 Countdown, he described the toll treatment had taken on his body, calling the process pretty debilitating, while still expressing hope that better news was ahead if his scans continued to improve. By June 2023, in an interview with the Oklahoman, he reported that his tumor had shrunk by roughly a third and that he was continuing both chemotherapy and immunotherapy, a treatment designed to help the immune system target cancer cells directly. Doctors who later spoke to outlets like NBC News noted that stomach cancer is notoriously difficult to catch early, since symptoms like heartburn or mild digestive discomfort are easy to dismiss, which may explain why Keith's early signs went unrecognized for as long as they did. Despite the toll of treatment, Keith kept finding ways back to an audience. In September 2023, he appeared at the People's Choice Country Awards, delivering a performance of Don't Let the Old Man In, a song originally written for a Clint Eastwood film, and one that had taken on obvious new meaning given his circumstances. He was honored that night with a Country Icon Award. Then, in December 2023, he did something few expected. 3 sold-out shows at Dolby Live Inside Park MGM in Las Vegas, performed on December 10th, 11th, and 14th. He later wrote on social media that closing out the year with 3 sold-out nights was, in his words, a good way to end things. No one watching from the audience knew for certain that these would be his final public performances. Roughly 7 weeks later, on the night of February 5, 2024, Toby Keith died at his home in Oklahoma, surrounded by his family. A statement posted to his official channels described him passing peacefully, adding that he had fought his fight with grace and courage, and asking for the family's privacy to be respected. He was 62 years old. What almost no one knew in that first wave of grief was that, unbeknownst to Keith himself, voting members of the Country Music Hall of Fame had already elected him into their ranks before his death. According to CMA Chief Executive Sarah Traherne, the results simply hadn't been confirmed publicly yet, meaning Keith died without ever learning that he would join the institution's modern-era artist class. His family found out only hours after losing him, a detail that turned what should have been a moment of celebration into something far more complicated. He would later be inducted alongside John Anderson, honored in the Veterans Era category, and guitarist James Burton, recognized for his session and touring work. In the months between his death and that October ceremony, public tributes multiplied. Fellow artists including Blake Shelton, Carrie Underwood, Luke Combs, Jelly Roll, and Brooks and Dunn shared memories and performances in his honor. In August 2024, NBC aired a 2-hour primetime special titled Toby Keith, an American icon, featuring more than 25 musicians paying tribute, with his wife and 3 children in attendance. Through all of it, though, Tricia Covel herself remained largely out of the spotlight. Their son, Stellan Keith Covel, had effectively become the family's public voice, speaking at events and in interviews about his father's influence on his life. Tricia's absence from interviews wasn't framed by those close to the family as distance or reluctance to grieve publicly. It was simply, by most accounts, not yet her moment. That changed on October 20th. When her name was called during the medallion ceremony, Tricia walked on stage to accept her late husband's honor, with Stellan standing behind her for support. According to American songwriter and Taste of Country, both of whom covered the ceremony directly, it was the first public speech she had ever given, 16 minutes long, delivered from prepared notes but without hesitation once she began. She told the audience she felt fortunate to have spent, in her words, 43 years with him, a figure that traces back to when the two first met. She is a 19-year-old secretary, he a 20-year-old playing bars around Oklahoma after long days working the oil fields, long before Should Have Been a Cowboy ever existed. They would go on to marry in 1984. In her remarks, Tricia described her husband as someone who, in her words, loved hard and lived big, someone who enjoyed everything he did, and had, by his own account, no regrets. She spoke about the roles beyond music that defined him to her: husband, father, pop to his grandchildren, brother, friend and businessman, noting that he approached each one, in her phrase, masterful. She recalled fans who still approach her on the street, strangers who tell her they miss him every day, and how she tells them, simply, that she does too. She also repeated something Keith had said many times over the years about his decision to stay rooted in Oklahoma rather than relocate to Nashville for his career, that there might be better singers or better songwriters out there, but nobody would ever outwork him. It was, by several accounts from those in the room, a conversational, unpolished kind of speech, closer to a woman speaking to an old friend than delivering a formal address, which is likely part of why it resonated the way it did with an audience full of country music's most recognizable names. Beyond the ceremony, the more lasting piece of the story may be the one Tricia has spent over a decade building alongside her husband, largely outside interview cameras. In 2006, the couple founded the Toby Keith Foundation, dedicated to supporting children fighting cancer. In 2014, that mission became something physical: OK Kids Choral, a no-cost lodging facility built near the Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City, designed so families wouldn't have to choose between staying close to treatment and affording a place to sleep. Tricia has remained deeply involved in that work since Toby's death, continuing to support a cause she has described as close to her heart long before cancer ever touched her own family. A year after his passing, in February 2025, the family issued a brief statement marking the anniversary, saying they still couldn't quite believe it had been a year since the world lost him, describing a hole in both their hearts and their daily lives, while adding that they knew he would be proud of the legacy left behind. It was a short statement, but a telling one. Less performance, more plain honesty, consistent with how the family has generally chosen to speak about their loss when they choose to speak at all. What makes Tricia Covel's October speech resonate isn't spectacle. It's the fact that a woman who spent nearly 40 years mostly out of the spotlight, married to one of country music's most visible figures, chose her words carefully and delivered them without pretense, in a room full of people who had known her husband far more publicly than she ever did. She didn't reveal a hidden scandal or a shocking secret. She simply told the truth as she'd lived it. The truth of a marriage that started with lemonade and small-town bars, and ended with a hospital room and a foundation that still bears his name. In an industry built on big choruses and bigger personalities, her 16 minutes were quiet by comparison. But for the people who had followed Toby Keith's fight for 2.5 years, that quiet honesty was, in its own way, the loudest thing anyone had said since he passed. His music will keep playing on the radio for generations of listeners who never met him. But it's worth remembering that behind the records and the arena tours was a marriage that lasted 4 decades, a family that chose privacy over spectacle even in public grief, and a wife who waited until she was ready, not until the world demanded it, to finally say goodbye out loud.